called PPBS, the Planning, Programming, and Budgeting System. Now, in about, I think it's 2006, they changed it and added the E because they realized it's not enough to program, budget, justify, get the money. You also have to pay attention to the fact that how you execute matters. Because we're given, as the Deputy Secretary said this morning, we're given the resources by the American people. We have to be responsible with that as well. And so it became PPBE. Now, some of you are probably sitting in the audience saying, that's great, Mike, but we're not DOD. And that's very true. We're not DOD. DOD has a much larger capital investment program. I mean, they're buying F-35s, they're buying KC-46 tankers, they're buying the Ohio-class replacement submarine. They have these large capital programs that it's very important to them to kind of program those resources into the future. But we're buying, of course, we are buying helicopters and airplanes. We do have to make decisions as far as how many Border Patrol agents and what's the cost someplace else as we acquire those. And so we have some of the same things. But another way that we're different and that makes this really a challenge for us is, and there are my colleagues in DOD, some of them would maybe disagree with me, but I would tell you that they're in a more stable environment. Now, yes, the threats and things are changing, absolutely, but the fact of the matter is, on a daily basis, what they're going after and pursuing is pretty much consistent. They take these long-range programs and they go. Now, how about us? We're as good as the last bench jumper at the White House, an OIG report that says, oh, they're getting these, they're able to smuggle certain weapons through the transportation checkpoints. We have a surge at the border. We kind of get whipsawed, and I'll talk about that again here in a little while, but it becomes very easy for us to be attracted to whatever the current event of the day is, like Stough flooding. And our congressional oversight kind of feels the same way, and so there's a challenge for us here in order to be able to actually look long range and try to program in a way that lets us make responsible trade-offs. That lets us actually look at how we strategize, we should have a plan, how we then establish programs to achieve that plan and resource those programs, how we develop the budget to make sure that it's properly priced so that we can defend it, both to OMB and to Congress, and then finally, we actually have to pay attention to how we execute. And by the way, execution is not just how we spend the money, and it's not just the oversight, those are very important, but it's also how are we actually accomplishing against our mission. Any questions as we go? And by the way, this could be a discussion as we go through. If you have a question, shoot your hand up and we'll go from there. So that's kind of the overview. Now, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to us? Well, everybody was with the Deputy Secretary this morning. What did you hear her say about 2018? It's an anomaly, right? And what did she mean by that? Well, ever since 2011, the Budget Control Act of 2011, we have had a fiscally constrained top line that was constrained by legislation. If you exceed a cap, sequestration kicks in and they have a across-the-board cut. Well, once prior, maybe twice, but recently, of course, we had this budget agreement between the Senate and the House that then was signed by the President that significantly increased non-defense spending for both 18 and 19. So it looks like if you've got your 18 appropriation, most of you are probably feeling pretty good about where you're sitting right now. Because we did get additional money. We got additional funding, just like the rest of the non-defense side of the House got additional funding. And we're going to get additional funding in 19. Now, I can't do anything about 19. It's with the Hill, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there is, you can expect to see kind of the same thing. The top lines are fairly high. The non-defense top line for 19 is $605 billion. It was supposed to be about $40 billion lower than that. The 20 top line, for which there is no budget agreement, and which is going to drive us back down again, is $558 billion. So we're going to have to lose, $578 billion. So we're going to have to lose about $27 billion across non-defense spending going into 20 absent another budget agreement. And you may be thinking, well, they just have to have another budget agreement. And they could do that. But remember, the agreements they just made are driving about $1 trillion hole. We're about to see deficits for the first time since the recession of over $1 trillion. And so there's going to be pressure to keep it down. Now, why do you care? Because we have to look at this from the standpoint that the assumptions are we're going to have a constrained top line going forward. That some of the top line that we think we have is probably going to disappear. As she said, it's an anomaly. And so we have to be able to figure out, we have to make deliberate decisions about how we're going to resource and be able to do the missions of this department. And understand the risk associated because we never have enough money. I did this in the Air Force for years, and I didn't care. And I'll tell you, DOD, as far as I'm concerned, is swimming in cash. They'll never admit it, but they are. But every year was a really tough year. You never had enough money. It was always the worst budget year you ever had, every year. And so, that's just the way we think. But over here, it's true. We never have enough money. We're on the non-defense side. Some of you, if you're in Coast Guard, for example, or NPPD, you'll have a little 050 defense funding because that's had some upward pressure on it. But for the rest of us, it's pretty much they're expecting flat top line. That's what OB is holding to. But why is this important to us to actually do this with multi-year programming? I want to highlight just 2 or 3 of those. First, we had a program manager in the room. How important is it to you that you have a stable funding profile going forward? Probably pretty important. And that could be whether he's acquiring a capital asset, trying to figure out when he's going to get long lead materials for the offshore patrol code. Or that could be when he's trying to decide out what program you've got, but how many sprint teams is he going to be able to actually hire in order to meet the milestones for the agile development of whatever IT system he's working on. So it's important that we have some, and he'll never have enough money either, by the way, just asking. But it's important that we be able to tell him what amount he's going to have. What is his allowance? It's also important. Anybody from Secret Service in here? Nobody. Well, I'll tell you, if they were, they would be able to tell you that every 4 years, there's going to be an election. And so if we don't plan for that, and we don't actually include every 4 years the funding, and we actually program for that, so that every 4 years there's a spike for them because we're going to have additional travel, all the protective detail, they're going to have to bring in all the different campaign events, with the different candidates. They got the screening equipment and everything else they have to bring in, so we have to be able to plan for that. So you need to be able to plan for cyclical events. And then one that I think is really important that we're really not as good at yet as we need to get is projecting consequences of present decisions into the future. And I mentioned Border Patrol agents a little while ago. What is the right mix of border technology, impedance and denial, in other words, wall, and Border Patrol agents? And how do they interplay? If I add surveillance on the border, does that reduce the number of Border Patrol agents or increase it? Because now I can see more people trying to come across and I need more for the apprehension. If I put a wall in place, does it reduce the need for the additional technology as far as being able to see in that area? Or do I need to see just as much because now I'm worried about tunneling or whatever else? These are the things we need to be able to model. The Coast Guard has a research and development center that does a really good job with the work that they have, but they have a long way to go as well. We're not where DOD is. And one of the reasons is because we are in a DOD basically sizes their force to get ready to go to war. We are at war every day, which is a kind of, I don't mean that to be such a bellicose statement, but we are undergoing, our operations occur daily. We're not really planning for it, we're doing it. The agents are apprehending at the border. The enforcement and removal officers are moving and rounding up, the MS-13 bullets. The Coast Guard is out saving lives or interdicting, illegal fisheries or whatever might be going on. All of that's happening today. And so it's a dynamic environment to try to model into, but we really need to figure that out. And because that will give us better decisions in the future. Okay, so I talked about it sequentially, but let's face it. We know that we have multiple concurrent cycles going on at one time. We're in 18. So those of you in financial management, financial operations, you're executing and providing oversight of that 18 today. If you're involved in helping prepare for defense of your component's budget or defense of DHS's budget, you're involved in FY19 right now. That's because that's the President's budget that's on the Hill. The Secretary testifies to the Civil Appropriations Committee next Tuesday. So she's in the middle of defending the budget for DHS. Much of your leadership has been doing that as well. And of course, even while those are going on, and you're trying to respond to all the taskers and everything else that go with that, now here we come, because now we're beginning to build fiscal year 2020 through 2024. We work in a 5-year cycle. It's a 5-year resource plan. So the components have been working through the winter. I'll show you in the slide in a minute, but they've been working through the winter to build their resource allocation plans that then all come to us. And so we're starting to talk 2020 through 2024. So we're talking that even as mid-year review is beginning for 18. So there's a lot of different pieces going on. And oh, by the way, the planners are already starting to develop. They're actually getting together working on resource planning guidance for 21 through 25. So all this is happening at one time. And I'm sure many of you felt into this. Okay, and this is just a little bit of to show you from my perspective, from our piece of this, and I'll talk more about programming in a minute. But this really, we have a program budget review slide that talks about it some more, but really, just to show you, we begin with the guidance, the resource planning guidance, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. The fiscal guidance, which is where the components get the top line, that says this is how much money you have, or in this case, it is for FY 2020 through 2024. So we give them a top line for each year, and then the components figure out with that amount of money, what is it they're going to resource and where they're going to take risk. So they work that through the winter, they submit the resource allocation plans, which they should have done already. Most of them have. A few are still struggling. We've made some changes in the way we ask for the submission, and a couple of them are really having some trouble with it. And then some, to be honest with you, leadership is still making decisions, because this is hard stuff. You never have enough money. It's hard stuff. But we will then begin program and budget review, which is really a series of issue teams and then DMAGs, Deputies Management Action Group, where we actually go, we will take and build a picture of everything that came from the components. We will help the leadership understand, here's what the components are resourcing, here's where they're taking risks, here's the critical issues we need to be talking about. And then leadership will hopefully make some decisions. We will take that information then to the secretary. The secretary will bless it or give us more homework, and then we will finish up with, we'll have a 2020 through 2024 resource allocation decision that will then be, we'll hand FY 2020 to budget, and they'll begin working with those of you that are involved in that part of it to develop the OMB justifications, the congressional justifications that will go forward, and then we will work on putting together the Future Years Homeland Security Program, which is a 5-year program that we're supposed to do by Congress. That will be submitted along or just shortly after the budget. But that's kind of that's a graphic depiction of PBR. Now, let's get into each of the areas we're talking about here for a second. So, the purpose of planning should be to look longer range, to figure out what are my goals and objectives of my organization, and then from that should drive what do I require, what are the things that I need in order to get there. So there would be a steady state assessment to say, this is where I think I'm going to get to. I want to be able to, we had an executive order that said, achieve complete operational control of work. And that meant 0 illegal entry of people, contraband, or anything else. So if you said, that's my plan, then you would say, what are the requirements to get there? What do I need? How many border patrol agents do I need? How much fencing? How much wall do I need? What kind of sensor technology do I need to actually have good visibility, good surveillance over that part of the border? So that would be, that's where you would do your strategic planning, if you will. You're planning to look ahead and say, this is what I want to do. That's one example. The Coast Guard across their missions plans, NPPD certainly looking in the cybersecurity space, it should be looking long range. But all of this should initially be guided by the top level capstone plans, if you will. First is the National Security Strategy. It was released December 28, 2017. Anybody here read it? If you haven't, I would recommend you just skim through the first part, because the first part talks about protecting the homeland. Specifically talks about weapons of mass destruction. It talks about violent terror threats. It talks about securing the border and immigration enforcement. So it's worth reading the first part of it just to get a sense of, again, where we fit in the bigger picture, because DHS has some responsibility for that we need to understand. I already talked about the fact that we get whipsawed by recent world events and performance. I will tell you that actually impacts, it kind of hurts our long-range planning to a certain extent, because we have to react. But we certainly have to incorporate the things that are happening. And they're watching for emerging threats, for example. Those sorts of things can impact how we plan. And so there is a piece of that, too, that we got to pay attention to. And then once you get past the strategic drivers, that at the strategic level, the DHS drivers, we're supposed to produce a quadrennial and Homeland Security review every 4 years. And they're actually working on that now. We're delayed because of the change in leadership, I think, in the department. But they're working on that document. And they're also working on what we really should have had already, because it should guide everything else we do, and that's a strategic plan. A strategic plan is required by the Government Performance and Results Act, Modernization Act, it's a mouthful, the PROMA, 2010, that says that every 4 years you're supposed to produce like a 5-year plan. And I would tell you that I don't think 5 years is long enough, but I guess maybe in our business it is. I'm still trying to wrap my head around DHS versus DOD. They will plan a bit longer because there's a reason for it. Maybe hours should be shorter, but I'm still trying to understand that paradigm, to be honest with you. And so that's an area where we're still trying to figure it out a little bit. But we're required to have a plan. The plan, of course, because we had a change in leadership that went from Secretary Kelly to a while with acting Secretary Duke to now Secretary Nelson. They're putting, I think, the finishing touches on the plan that will give us the goals and objectives, and that's what that should guide. That's the framework that should guide the rest of the work that we do. Because if we know where the Secretary's priorities are, then we should be working toward those priorities. And we'll talk about those in a minute. But then, of course, if you have the strategic plan, and we'll leave the strategic reviews out for a second, that should drive in, like I said earlier, so what do I require to get it done? What capabilities do I need? And so there should be the capabilities and requirements planning. Has everybody heard of the Joint Requirements Council? The Joint Requirements Council is the body that oversees the development of the requirements. I'll call it requirements development and validation. So when you look at what it is you plan to do, there will be gaps in what you can do. And those gaps will drive the requirement for a solution. It could be material or non-material. And so we have a process by which they then articulate what those requirements are, and we get them validated. I should not be resourcing anything or recommending that something be resourced if there's not a validated requirement behind it. Because this is, again, we have limited resources. We have to balance risk. And so if it's not something that you can prove to me that's a requirement, it's just a good idea, then we shouldn't be putting money in this. And that's one of the things that we're maturing at as a department. And then finally, the last strategic driver, which is more short-term focus, is resource planning guidance. That actually comes up in a regular cycle. It should normally come out in November, because it should be out in time. Like I said, the components start building the resource allocation plans across the winter. So that shows that it's actually published by policy. And it has a section where they identify certain resource planning priorities. I would say there's still kind of programming priorities, because again, in my world, if you're inside the FISIP, you're programming, because that's really a program of record. Outside of FISIP is really where we're trying to plan. But again, I'm still struggling with how do we match the two, because we are more short-term, the way it gets circulated around us. So I'm just telling you, I don't have it all right. We're still not exactly sure where we should be. But they put out resource planning guidance with resource planning priorities, and then with programmatic guidance. And the programmatic guidance is where we tell them, based on previous decisions, you're expected to do things. Well, they fund your acquisition programs, is what we might tell them to do. We will tell them to hire Border Patrol agents along the 7-year plan that had previously been approved. We would tell them there's certain things they're supposed to do. You could call them red lines. Now, the components and their leadership will decide if they're going to go along with what we tell them. It's programmatic guidance. You like to think of it as programmatic direction, but the commissioner of CBP is responsible for enforcing the borders and handling trade and travel. And the commissioner of CBP is going to make decisions based on where he thinks he's more comfortable with the risk. And so they will bring that into us, and we'll have the deliberation. So, but anyway, the resource planning guidance, published by policy, we have a piece on it, and that is guidance components can use to start building their resource allocation plans. And then we get into the programming process. So, over the winter, components build their resource allocation plan. And then they submit them to us. Like I said, we assemble them, we provide a picture. And what happens next, what really should be happening is we should be teeing up for leadership decisions on here's what we resource, here's where we're taking risk, where you want to allocate resources instead. Or do you? Are you happy with what the components have done? This same thing happens, or should be happening, inside the components when they're building their resource allocation plans. They go to leadership, we've given them a top line, not enough money, and they've said, in the TSA's case, for example, we need to be buying CT, computed tomography machines, that the advanced next level of screening. We need to be buying some of those. So here's the program that we plan to bring forward for that, but here's where we're going to take risks together. Leadership makes decisions. That's happening in each of the components. And then it all comes to us, and then we have to aggregate to capture that and articulate, again, where everybody's taking risk. At the same time, there are certain issues that arise. And those issues are things that are questions. So what do we need to do in the area of IT modernization? I will tell you that every component in here, pretty much, maybe not this one, but pretty much every component has taken risk in IT modernization. Because we have a mission to do. They're focused on the mission. And the business support side of things sometimes gets short-shrift. And so we're facing a position where we have technology that is really starting to be outdated, we're starting to lose reliability, there are issues that can lead to failure. I mean, FEMA deploys with a lot of technology when they go. And if their laptops aren't working, if their servers aren't up to speed, then that can impact their response to a hurricane. If the communication systems between the different, border stations, if they're suffering from lack of reliability, that can impact their ability to do their mission. So, but it doesn't feel like a mission-related thing necessarily, but it is. But we have to take a look at that, because there are solutions other than just buy new equipment. Maybe it's move some things in the cloud. Maybe it's outsource more of what we're doing so that somebody else takes care of the research, whatever. But that's an issue, and we'll have an issue team that looks at the different options and then brings in different options for leadership to decide on what you want to fund and how you want to fund it. So we have issue teams. So we come in and we characterize what they've got and we discuss the risk. We have issue teams that will offer options as well. And then we look for things that, because each individual component, you care about your budget, but there are certain things that are enterprise. IT modernization is a good example. But if we're cross-cutting your enterprise, we want to make sure that we're talking about those as well. Once leadership has made decisions on what the funding is going to look like and where, then we generate what's known as a resource allocation decision, or RAP. And that is the Secretary's decision on where we're going to fund different programs. We will then hand over to budget the year 2020, because their job is to do the formulation and the defense of that and work with the components of that. And like I said, we'll continue to build a 5-year plan, 5-year Interior Homeland Security plan, program. And then after, I'm going to go to the next slide, then I'll talk about the post-settlement right here. Go to the next slide. I think I might actually cover almost everything on this slide, that last one. We talked about requirements. Yeah, I think I covered that. Okay. After we get done with the 5-year resource plan, we hand it the budget. Budget's job is to work with the components to develop the justification for the decisions that have been made. So they've made decisions of where they want to put money. They're going to stand up a new program one place and take risks someplace else. All of that has to be communicated to Congress, because Congress, really, they're the ones who make those final decisions. But before we get to Congress, of course, we go through the Office of Management and Budget. So they'll prepare a set of justifications for OMB. OMB will take and analyze the FY20 submission. We'll provide what's known as passback. And passback is a document, I've seen it very thick and I've seen it fairly thin. It comes back and tells us where we're supposed to shift resources based on the decisions that they think we need to make. From OMB. We have the chance to appeal those decisions. There's negotiation that happens, but in the end, there is some small shift of resources. It is really relatively small. It feels big at the time because there is a Pareto distribution in this. Some of the smallest numbers sometimes have the greatest impact. So it may feel bigger, and there's a lot of activity that goes on. But ultimately, OMB will make some decisions. We'll negotiate. They'll have the final numbers, and then the components build the congressional justifications that go to Congress. They go to Congress. Congress then has the opportunity for the hearings, and from there they make the decisions on appropriation. Now, once we have passback, we will issue one last resource allocation decision we call a post-settlement RAP. We try to capture all the decisions. So you should have a set of funding tables that tell you specifically where the money is laid out across the different programs, and everybody has a pretty good picture then, and so that when we walk into the next year, we all have the same picture as we go forward. So that is that's budgeting. And then execution. And execution has a couple of parts to this. Like we talked about earlier, there's execution of, actually overseeing. There's the spending itself. Those of you that, whether you're cutting purchase orders, whatever it is that you're doing, there's the piece that financial operations, handling the travel, whatever the case is. There's the oversight in the financial management world, we're getting ready for the next audit and making sure that we have the controls in place to spend the money properly. But there's also a non-financial aspect of performance management. And like I talked about earlier, Prama not only said, here's your strategic plan you're supposed to do, but they also said, you're supposed to, with the goals and objectives, you're supposed to measure how you're doing here. Because we're supposed to be able to articulate the value that we're delivering to the taxpayer. We're supposed to be able to say how well we're performing against our goals and objectives. And so every year, we have a strategic review. We're finishing up that process now. And the strategic review looks at the mission programs. And we also try to look at the acquisition program that support it. But they look at actually how well are we doing operationally. How well are we doing at interdicting illegal migrants at the border? How well are we doing at saving lives? How well are we doing at driving down the leisure boating accident rate? How well are we doing at whatever, you name it? How well are we doing at processing immigration requests, naturalization requests? All of that information is brought into the strategic review. And so we get done with the strategic review, we have a set of, at the end, what are the risks of being on the compass mission, and we also have a grade, if you will, that says that we're doing satisfactory. We have focus areas that need additional attention, or in some cases, noteworthy improvement. Now, the focus areas doesn't mean that you're doing a bad job or getting a failing grade. The focus areas mean that because of the environment in which you're operating, because of whatever challenges you may have, CIS has a backlog when it comes to processing, immigration, naturalization forms. All of those requests, they have a backlog. They almost can't throw enough resources at it again with the backlog when you get a certain size. There are a lot of factors that go into that. But we need to figure out what it is we can do to help them. So that becomes, let's say, a focus area. It's just one notional example. We generate a lot of different reports that go with this. But that's execution. So that's PPBE around the world. We have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any at all on any area. You want to know, what, I don't know, whatever question you might have. I have no idea.
Just since we don't have any. Sure. It seems we're moving a lot of maybe from the DoD model more budget areas into kind of programming here than DHS. Meaning that we're doing some ODJs and kind of Schedule B type narratives, kind of year-over-year budget narratives instead of the traditional programming, prior visits to current visits. Is there something that's driving that, more of a budget orientation on top of what programming is doing?
Yeah, it is, and that's, I think you captured it right. Budget orientation. It's not so much a budget orientation as this is program and budget review. And so what we're trying to do is get to the point where what happens now is if you just look at it programmatically, if you just look at the program changes, if you will, at the high level of the programs themselves, or move funding in and move funding out, then what happens at the end is, so you make those decisions, but when you get to the end, suddenly now, here comes the next level of definition for everything you've done for the object class. And suddenly it becomes a race for a budget to be able to get everything they have to do to make sure it's all priced properly, to make sure that we have the right numbers in place before we go forward to Congress. So if we're trying to move that earlier in the process so that we're working more concurrently, that we want to be able to look at it strategically. We want to be able to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, what are we doing with the program? But we also want to give budget opportunity to have the information they need so that when we come down to the end, the process isn't a mad dash. It actually is something that's smooth. Now, there's pain in getting there, but I'll tell you, one reason why you say you're not doing it in DoD, but the problem is with DoD is they have a system where you don't, and I don't know, I'm not sure what service you came out of, or recruiter service over there. Anybody been Marine Corps? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I know in the Air Force, for example, with the Alliance system, that when you made a program change, it captured all of that information down below. It was automatic. We haven't had that. We're working on Excel spreadsheets, which I've got the goddess of all Excel spreadsheets over here because she can do things with Excel that I did not think Excel can do. But even we are reaching the limits of where we can get to, and the new system will make some of this easier. I think that's our intent, is to make it easier. But what we're trying to do is move more of that up front so that everybody has a chance to work concurrently, so that when we get to the end, we have a better, more dependable product, as opposed to all the changes on the price we do. Now, that's easy for me to say. It's been painful for you. I understand that. And, we're all trying to work together to get through this. So thank you for your patience. That's another one. Okay. Thank you for your time.